Oh, there we are. We have a quorum now. Mayor Biss has joined us. We will get the meeting started. Thank you, everyone, for joining us for our Participatory Budgeting Committee meeting. Do we have minutes on the agenda from our last meeting? Yes.
June
First, I'll declare that we have a quorum. And we'll take roll. Mayor Biss. Councilmember Nusma.
Here.
Sorry, to unmute myself.
Yeah, you're fine. And then let's see, Councilmember Bernstein. And then may I have a motion for the minutes?
Move approval of the minutes of our Thursday, June 2nd meeting.
I'll second that. All those we'll have to do a roll call. Councilmember Nusma.
Aye.
Mayor Biss.
Aye.
Myself, aye. Great. Okay, that moves us to our first and only item of. First, I'll allow for public comment, but I am familiar with the participants here. I think there may be no public comment, but certainly we'll have you jump in the conversation as it gets going. Okay, so that brings us, if there is no public comment, to our first item of business, which is a discussion about the stakeholder committee. Matthew, you sent over a few questions for us to consider. So first, I'll want to take a step back and Matthew, or if you want to describe what the stakeholder committee is. And then we'll jump into the discussion regarding the questions.
Yeah, I can give a brief summation, and anyone else on the call who knows about participatory budgeting can kind of fill in the gaps.
I'm sorry, steering committee is the word that I meant to use there.
Yeah, so the steering committee is a group of most often residents, city officials, and elected officials who represent different stakeholder groups that help build the rules for the participatory budgeting process and help design and guide the process.
Great. Thank you for that. And so I think the first question for us to answer is, do we believe that council members, the members of the PB committee, should serve on this steering committee? Some cities, the elected officials do serve on the steering committee. In other cities, and I think in a lot of PB experiments, the elected officials do not serve on the steering committee. I will, I guess, just to kick it off, if no one else wants to, say that I personally support elected officials serving on the steering committee with no greater role or lesser role than any other community member.
That makes sense to me. Skipping to the bottom line, I'm not going to volunteer for that, but it does make sense.
Good. Okay.
I think it's fine too. I would just caution that there is the formal thing that Councilmember Reed just referred to, which is the rules not giving elected officials a greater level of authority than other members. That's easy to achieve. There's also the informal thing, which is an elected official's voice in a conversation like that comes across different than everybody else's. And so I think it will be incumbent on the elected officials who wind up playing this role to be really intentional about stepping back and letting others step up first.
Yeah, I agree. And I think there's maybe even a way for the steering committee to work that into their rules in some way to account for the the unspoken influence of a council member. Okay, we have that. So council members will, in our idea, will be able to serve on the steering committee, but with no greater powers than any other committee member. And then I think the next question is, how do we recruit members? Do we allow an open call? So again, in some communities, and anyone feel free to jump in if you have anything different, but in some communities, the steering committee allows for an open call and kind of participation at will. And in other communities, it is a defined committee where certain members have voting power and other members do not. And so I think that the question is, should we allow an open call with anyone to participate fully, or select people?
Before we answer that, let's clarify to what extent is this steering committee going to be formally organized? Is it going to be appointed as a formal BCC?
Well, yeah, I guess that's a similar question. It's the same question.
Related question, I suppose.
Yeah, because if we are going to go the route of traditional route of appointing folks, then yes. If we aren't, then it's more of a town hall, or more akin to a Mayor Biss might be familiar with this from his time in Springfield, to what a township has the power to do. The township annual meetings allow for an open style of voting on items and participation. So, my opinion would be that a hybrid essentially is that we reach out. No one's appointed officially, but we reach out to folks and ask them to serve as members of this committee, but while still allowing other folks to participate in the steering committee under some criteria.
I think it needs to be clear who's on the steering committee and who's not, just for the purposes of efficiently managing a meeting. Mm-hmm. Obviously, the intent is to cast a wide net and be inclusive of community input here, so folks can attend a meeting even if they're not technically on the committee. But I do think it definitely makes sense to discreetly define who is on the committee.
So I'll ask Matt, I guess both Matt Easterday and Matthew, either or anyone who wants to jump in, their opinion on this. I know the assemblies are certainly forums that are more open and allowing greater participation. Do you all have, or Mayor Biss as well, have an opinion on whether the steering committee needs to be crafted in a similar fashion to the assemblies?
Dr. Easterday, do you have any opinions?
Yeah, sure. So one of the, I think these are all good ways to do it. I think it's important to have the defined names in terms of who's signing off and supporting it. I think the other big concern with the steering committee is we want to make sure that we're representing underrepresented groups. So I think it's really important that we have some sort of official representative of the different groups that we're trying to make sure can participate. In the PB Chicago steering committee, they have about, I think it's on the order of like about 10 groups that are officially on it, including alder people from each participating ward. And the reason they have that is, I think, because it needs the city's like official kind of stamp to make sure that these are set. I think we can definitely allow for a wider group of people to post comments and inform it that way. So I think that might be a nice hybrid way of doing it. There's also a need right now to move quickly since we're behind schedule. So this has to take as long as it's going to take to get the community buy-in, but we also do not want to take so long that we cut off the time we have to do outreach.
How Interim Manager Stoneback asked an interesting question. How many members do we think should serve on the steering committee? I think I've seen them, slightly larger committees, maybe 10, 12, 15 people. Does that sound kind of typical?
I think that's right. And in the very first one, they put out they basically tried to get everyone that they could get. And I think they ended up with a pretty large group, like around 40 or so, but then it was about 12 people that did the actual heavy lifting.
Yeah. See, that is my memory. I remember I met with Alderman Moore. I'm reading Christine Liu's comment here. The folks were saying that I met with Joe Moore when I was clerk and discussed their program and their rule setting committee. They did an open call, and as Christine describes here, about 75 people showed up. 40 people agreed to design the rule process, and then about 12 of those people did the heavy lifting. And I think, looking to something like that for design of the steering committee, allowing for an open call, making an effort to get folks who are represented and kind of winnowing it down through that process to who's really going to lead it. Mayor Chris, do you have any?
No, not really.
Okay.
I mean, I've also had these conversations with Joe Moore and heard sort of the same story, but in terms of, I just don't feel equipped to have a strong view on the best way of handling this.
Okay. So does that sound fine to you, Councilmember Nusma, that it would be winnowed down, like you said, to a group of folks who are defined on the committee, and we'll have the formal appointment process, but there would be a hybrid of us attempting to reach out to certain groups and folks to be represented on the committee, and also allowing an open call as well. Does that sound?
That makes sense. Start with
Okay.
essentially kind of a town hall, open call with specific invitations to specific groups of people. And you'll then see what individuals are willing to put some time and
describe
effort
what
into
the
it.
commitment, exactly. Describe what the commitment is, see who's willing to put in that commitment, and
Yeah.
go from there.
Yeah,
Okay.
makes sense.
Good. Okay. And then I think we would, the question about how often would the steering committee meet, I think we'll leave that to the steering committee itself to determine its meeting schedule. Does that make sense? With with a clear understanding of what the task is, I think they can make their own decision.
Right.
As long as there's an understanding of what the timeline is.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And that's why I think it makes sense to have a council member on the committee so council can be kept informed.
Yeah, and I'm happy to serve on that committee, and I would assume Councilmember Burns is as well. I believe he expressed that to me.
Thank you for your service.
Who needs to be represented? And then I guess the next question that then leads us to, who are the groups that we want to ensure that we reach out to for this town hall to be represented on this committee? I mean, I think I'll throw out there first for the council, I think the same group that we had, mix of folks who did the stakeholder panel for the city manager search, the community stakeholders. I think we should reach out to them and have them, reach out to someone either that works for them or, in their service pool to be a part of it.
I think that makes sense. I'd have to look and see who was on that list, but if we did the job right at that point, we'd probably be. I don't need to repeat it here.
I do think if there was anyone missing there, I think making sure we're reaching out to groups like Evanston Fight for Black Lives, groups like CNP. Groups like the CABG and other organizing groups, I think makes sense to reach out to them as well.
I would agree. Let's make sure we have Evanston Latinos,
yeah,
represented, and maybe we want to bring this to Councilmember Hadakatis' attention as well as Clerk Mendoza. And they might be interested in participating on the steering committee.
Sure.
Which I, would not be opposed to. Would be fully supportive of. Let me rephrase that. I would be fully supportive.
Yeah. Okay, I think that's who we would reach out to. We can have that list, shared with us. We can have this, someone's office provide us with the stakeholder group list, and then we can fill that in. And if there's anything missing on that list, such as Councilmember Newsom's suggestions or mine, we can just fill those in and make sure that we reach out to all of those groups.
And this, as a sidebar, this will probably be the same list that we will eventually use for redistricting conversations and community outreach on that issue.
Sure. Yeah, maybe we should just have a master list of when we're doing outreach, who are the go-to folks that we. So we should maybe have that list created at some point. I guess the next question is how soon would we like to have the initial town hall, and we need to get together an early presentation on what the role of the steering committee would be and explaining what PB is. So I guess I'll go to Matt and Director and Manager Stoneback.
At this point in time, we're hoping to be able to take a recommendation, a recommendation for a sole source agreement with Northwestern to have this work performed by them on June 27th. So I perceive you could start before that if you wanted to. And again, we currently do not have the staff to do a whole lot of this with our current staff, which is why also on June 27th, we'll be seeking approval to hire a BB manager and a full-time manager and a half part-time coordinator, because current staff is just stretched too thin to take on these additional responsibilities at this time.
So does this, Matt, maybe you could, Professor Easterday, maybe you can jump in here and suggest maybe a timeline for that initial meeting, assuming everything goes well with the Northwestern contract.
Yeah, I think the contract's on track. I'd like to talk with Matt and David about timelines, but I'd like to start sooner rather than later. So I think as soon as we have the list, we should start immediately reaching out and telling people kind of like what's expected of them. I'd love to schedule the town hall in less than a month from now, because it's going to take a while for the steering committee to do their work. So the sooner we can move, the better.
Yeah. And what capacity do we have? I think this is something we should really promote to just widely to the community. Either at Northwestern or within the city, what capacity do we have to create promotional materials, just advertising, hey, there's 3.7 or whatever it is. We have $3.5, $3 million, whatever it ends up being, that the community will get to directly vote on how to expend, and we're having a town hall about that. And from that town hall, we'll have a steering committee created. What capacity do we have to create, some engaging material around that?
Yeah, I'd like to get some local Evanston graphic designers to produce that material, so we can definitely do a lot of that work. Okay, and is that
forgive me if I don't know if I've seen an updated contract. Is that kind of stuff covered by the contract, or is that, is that just a part of the programming cost that will be separate of the contract?
I think that can be within our contract, if that's okay with Matthew and David. Because there's some balance of also like what communications do you want to do through the city and what communications do you want to do through other channels, but we're happy to do whatever's useful there.
And at this point in time, yes, I would prefer your group to do that, because again, until we get new staff
Folks on board.
Pretty sure.
Yeah. Okay, that is helpful. There's one last thing I want to throw into the discussion here that maybe is best served for the steering committee, but maybe something that we want to put on. I think, and again, there may be another venue for this. I think that the council should push to, I think we should push to have ranked choice voting implement for choosing the projects here. I think that would help, educate the community on ranked choice voting. I think it would be a good experiment for ranked choice voting along with PB. I think for directly choosing how funds are expended, I think ranked choice voting, and especially given that it's not a traditional election, I think this might be a good place to roll out ranked choice voting. Councilmember Newsome or Mayor Biss, do you have any opinion on that?
I like it if it makes sense. It's a little bit unclear to me how this would be balloted, and how we would be allocating money amongst several different projects. It's not going to be, just a winner take all.
Right.
We have to narrow it down to one. So, hey, if we can incorporate ranked choice voting, fantastic. As long as it can be done so in a way that makes it easier and more efficient. It doesn't make it seem more confusing.
Right.
Because what we're choosing here is not analogous to a municipal election, in that there's only going to be one winner in a municipal election.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm the same place that Jonathan is, which is to say, sure, sounds good, but it's probably, once we get closer into understanding what the balloting is going to look like and what the sort of universe of potential outcomes is, there may be other voting systems to consider. Do we want to do approval voting? Do we want to do everybody gets 10 votes, but they can allocate them all to the same project, or 7 to this project and 2 to this one and 1 to that one? I just,
okay, yeah, no,
I don't have a clarity on what the
fair.
right way to do it is, but I agree that if we're moving toward considering ranked choice voting for municipal elections, it would be kind of convenient for this to be a kind of dry run for the community.
I gave residents at a ward meeting 43 pennies, each representing $1 million, and asked them to put them in jars representing different ARPA categories. So maybe something like that.
That's kind of like approval voting, similar to what Mayor Biss was talking about, the 10
Yeah.
votes. Okay, yeah.
Actually, so sounds like alchemy.
Yeah. Okay, so that sounds fine. I think the underlying thing is, hey, we can get creative with the way that the voting is conducted, and we can leave that to the steering committee in a later date to decide. But we can maybe throw in, hey, if we do adopt ranked choice voting, if the council chooses to move forward with that, then maybe it would be best to try to adopt some form of that. Okay, are there any other questions that need to be answered at this point? So it seems as though the next steps are that we're going on the 27th. On the council agenda will be approval of the Northwestern contract, approval of funding for the new positions, and once those two pieces are in place, we'll be ready to start really laying the groundwork for this initial town hall. We'll, in the meantime, be putting together a list of the groups that we want to reach out to. Maybe we can create a shared Google Sheets doc and not have everyone on at the same time. And kind of throw in names and contacts there that are missing. We can work with I'm happy to work with Professor Easterday and the team to in developing some promotional materials around this, or we can bring that back to the committee at the next meeting, or at a future meeting, I should say. Does that sound, do folks feel comfortable? Is there something we're missing?
That makes sense. That makes sense. I am tempted to suggest we somehow find some, since we're going through a similar outreach and engagement process on redistricting, I'm tempted to kind of do a combined campaign on outreach. I'm not sure if that is a good idea or not. It might make it more confusing. It might add more work. So I'm just throwing that out there for consideration.
I would think that it might be somewhat confusing or mixing two separate things. I think using similar materials and maybe slightly adapting things on two kind of different timelines makes sense. But we can discuss it further.
Yeah. Just let's keep that in mind. We're going to be approaching, very similar target audiences in both cases over a very similar timeline. So if it makes sense to save people's time and kill two birds with one stone, I'd like to do that, but I'm not going to overcomplicate things.
Okay. Well, then maybe you and I can maybe
we'll talk offline.
that. Yeah, we'll discuss that offline. And so I guess next steps are 27th, approving Northwestern contract funding for the position and a half, the 1.5 FTEs. And then I guess after the 27th, we can begin working just directly with Professor Easterday and the team around setting up the initial town hall and the presentation and materials that will accompany that. Does that sound good?
Yep.
Okay. Director
Works for me.
and Stoneback.
Thank you for Chair. I just want to, so there'll be an award of a contract, and following that is a resolution that would authorize the city manager to negotiate and enter into the agreement with NU. In addition to that, we need funding, probably around 75 to 100,000 for the program itself. I'm sorry, I'm trying to get my thoughts together. In ARPA, we're going to be able, there's 100,000 allocated for participatory budgeting outside the 3.5 million that we'll be able to use to hire Northwestern. And then also in the administrative cost, since we have not hired an ARPA administrator, council had approved funding for that position. It's not being used. So we think that there's sufficient funding, again, in this administration portion of ARPA funds for the full-time and the half-time person to manage the process. And then there's the $3.5 million for dividing up. However, I think that we need to allocate about 200,000 of that 3.5 for other expenses other than projects. So we might want to,
I think allocating about
people on the steering committee, but give them a token of appreciation.
Yeah.
And then we're going to have to pay for the flyers and mailing and some food and things like that. So I just wanted
think
to
setting aside, I've always envisioned it that we would set aside around 500,000 of the 3.5 million for the overall administration. I'm hearing now that there are some additional funds outside of the 3.5 that may be available. But I think 3 million is a nice round number. for the community to vote on. I think, 500,000, and, other folks on the committee can chime in, but I think 500,000 from PB, from the actual PB fund to administer the program sounds about right to me.
Right, and then just because I've seen the proposal that they provided, and I know we haven't shared it with the committee yet because it's still being fleshed out. Another really early item on all this is to get the playbook together.
Yeah.
And
That's what the steering committee does. Yeah.
that is correct. And one thing that we're going to have to make sure is clear is that the projects have to meet the ARPA qualifications as well and timeline. Meaning that the project has to be awarded sometime in 24 and expenditures complete by 26. So that's all part of what's going to have to go into the rule book as well. So just want to make sure, and we really are on that critical path here, because per the schedule that they have right now, they won't be voting on the projects until August/September of 23. Which means as soon as we get those, they go into the 24 budget so that they can be at least implemented in some form during 24 to meet the ARPA guideline. So just trying to keep everybody up to date on that critical timeline.
Yeah, thank you. And so I'm looking at the calendar now, and our next PB meeting would be on the 30th, which of course comes after the 27th. When council will approve all of this. So I think we'll be right, we'll be coming back together right at the right time to take the next critical steps.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, is there anything else from any member of the committee or staff? If not, I like short, efficient meetings.
Same here. Thank you, everybody. Move to adjourn.
Okay. All right. Seeing no further business before us, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
And
Sorry.
Matt, Easterday, can you stay on with Matt and I and your team so we can keep fleshing out some of the other stuff? Thank you.
Thanks all.
Thanks, everybody.
Is it fine if I stick around for a second?
Sure.
Okay.
That'd be fine.